And good morning, everyone, and welcome to your morning briefing for Tuesday, the 18th of February, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby, filling in for Mark. We got Robert and Jared on the show today. Let's go ahead and jump inside the Beltway here. Robert, good morning. Trump has created an energy dominance council. It sounds like it's going to do exactly what it's meant to do. What's going on?
Good morning, Mike. Yeah, this is the new White House National Energy Dominance Council. It's going to be chaired by Interior Secretary Doug Burgum and vice chaired by Energy Secretary Chris Wright. And this does look to be, the Trump administration's move on, building up the U.S. energy industry, because the goal of this is to shape energy policy across the federal government.
Mm-hmm. All right. Also, we've heard, I saw from a lot of Democrats over the weekend talking about this plane crash in Canada, blaming Trump somehow, blaming FAA, the firing of these probationary employees over at FAA, not doing critical work, by the way, as probationary employees, I don't believe. At any rate, the ATC union says they are reviewing safety. What's going on?
Yeah, this is the National Air Traffic Controllers Association. They said they're analyzing the effect of the Trump administration firing hundreds of FAA probationary employees on Friday. And it is important to point out that they do cover employees other than air traffic controllers. And they said that they have seen no signs that air traffic controllers were included in this round of terminations. And I think this is, one of those public media pressure campaign moves against the Trump administration. I think they're going to move to try to accuse Trump of putting air travel safety in jeopardy through these federal firings. But yeah, as far as I can tell, no air traffic controllers have actually been fired. It's only been other employees that are like technical maintenance employees.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then this is the union. So would they have a vested interest in creating more smoke over this? Do you think, Robert?
Yeah, I think so, because I think this is to protect their membership. In this case, it was just probationary employees. So I don't think they had any job protections, but I think they're looking forward to the future of potential cuts to non-probationary employees.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Nothing significant to report here for today's hearings. So let's go ahead and jump into this immigration judge firing. Robert, this has not made sense to some people. I've heard Democrats say, well, if Trump wants to expedite these court orders for removing illegal immigrants, then he needs more judges, not fewer judges. But that's actually not the case, correct?
Yeah, from what I understand, the Trump administration has expanded in what they've called expedited removals that completely bypasses the DOJ immigration courts. In this case, I think what this is in part, or kind of part of this whole reshaping of the federal bureaucracy that the Trump administration is engaging in. They're trying to clear out judges, ones that they can legally clear out because they're the most newly hired ones. And I think this has to do with the idea that they would expect, these immigration judges they could decide against removals or hinder Trump's immigration agenda, because this specific group of about 20 immigration judges was hired in December at the tail end of the Biden administration. And I think one of the judges actually said that in the letter they received, the DOJ said that them remaining on the immigration courts was actually not in the best interest of the Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm. So this was a case where potentially the Biden DOJ could have hired a bunch of judges to impede actual removals, correct?
I think that was the Trump administration's thinking in removing them, was that, the goal was for them to hinder the Trump's immigration agenda.
Mm-hmm. All right. And you also, I think you've been making this argument for a while here. This really is a political revolution, a bloodless coup, if you will, of decapitating all these senior civil service roles. And I heard someone over the weekend also make the argument that they're firing everyone. The Trump administration is firing as many people as is feasible, and they're going to get to a point where they're going to realize, oh, we actually need to hire some more people on, and then that's going to allow them to hire vetted people. And basically, it's just complete decapitation of senior service. Is that what you're saying, Robert?
Yeah, I think that's where they're headed. They're trying to they're trying to rein in a lot of these independent agencies that have been around, some of them since 1935, some of them much more recently, like the Consumer Financial Bureau. And I think it is a part of this larger second Trump term revolution that they're basically trying to decapitate people who would get in the way of Trump's agenda.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's move on to today's roll-ups with Jared. We got all global sit rep roll-ups here. Let's start off with in Sudan, where the civil war is worsening. I don't know. Seems like the civil war in Sudan has been worsening for most of my adult life, but what's going on?
Yes. That is kind of interesting that, there was a South Sudan one that broke off. But yes, so the two warring factions of the latest civil war in Sudan both announced their intention to create entirely new and separate governments, one even saying that he wants to form an independent government. And the reason this matters is it's a follow-up to the Russian naval base potentiality that we discussed on Friday. Mm-hmm. If Sudan's less stable, Russia's less likely to actually achieve that base. Moving on, the Hamas spokesman, said it's not necessary for Hamas to be part of the political and administrative arrangements in the next phase for Gaza, especially if it serves the interest of our people. You and I were talking before the show, and there's a fair amount of skepticism about that. But at the same time, that does meet well with the ceasefire talks, which the Israeli foreign minister said that there are talks to extend that ceasefire and secure the remaining hostages there.
Mm-hmm.
Bolivia.
It seems like Hamas is trying to end the war. They're trying to slink away, and they're saying we don't need to be involved in the next Gazan government, and they're just going to rebuild underground. I mean, I can't see how anyone doesn't actually understand that. At any rate, thanks, Jared. Let's move on to Bolivia.
Yes. So Bolivia recently paused Chinese and Russian lithium extraction operations in there. And Bolivia has some of the largest lithium reserves in the entire world. Now, Bolivia's president warned that this would potentially lose them the opportunity to extract lithium. And at the same time, his top advisor recalled that the U.S. Southern Command declared Bolivia's lithium deposits a matter of national security for America. So there are a lot of very interesting signals here. I think they're going to move toward nationalization of these mines. But we will see, since they do acknowledge there are external forces here.
Mm-hmm. And then, do you think this is being done through lobbying by the State Department? Because basically, it looks like Bolivia are they actually trying to freeze China and Russia out of lithium mining in their country, or what?
It does look like it. They were reporting that they had popular support at the ground level around these mines, saying, "Hey, we don't want them here." So it does look like they're going to try to freeze them out of it, which would greatly diminish China's grasp on lithium. That's something I've brought up a few times in notes, is that I think China's maintenance of, hey, we have all of this lithium production is not lithium mines in China, but control Chinese mines externally, which I think we could see quite a bit of a cascade here if this really kicks off.
Chinese management of mines in Bolivia. You said popular support there. These are Bolivians saying they do not want the Chinese there. Is that correct?
Yes, Bolivians on the ground, not from the government.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But the government citing those people.
All right. And then finally, let's wrap up here with a note from Russia. There's been a lot of talk about the future of Ukraine. U.S. State Department and Russian officials are meeting now in Saudi Arabia to discuss the future of Ukraine. I saw Zelensky over the weekend say he's not going to abide by any agreement where Ukraine does not have a seat at the table. At least for Russia's part, they're saying Ukraine can join EU, but not NATO. We've heard that for a long time. Anything new there?
The big thing there is that at the same time, Ukraine's President Zelensky is calling for Europe to develop a common armed forces, which would be through the European Union, negating Russia's entire stance here of, yes, you can join the EU because it is not a military alliance. It's just economic. That I think could sour the deal quite a bit. It would also, it would sour the deal. I'll leave it there.
And we've seen the French call for a European army away from NATO. And I don't want to get hung up on this, but over the weekend I saw just some reporter talking to these senior European diplomats. I think one was German. And the reporter asked, do you now view the United States as an adversary? And this German diplomat said, yes, we do view the United States now as an adversary. And that was part of the whole call for Europe needs its own military to defend Europe. They're finally waking up. I mean, you would think that the first Trump term should have been enough of a wake-up call for Europe, that they're going to have to do more to secure their continent. And I don't know, Jared. It just seems like this is a pretty needless response. It's also incendiary. I mean, calling the United States an adversary because we will no longer foot their bill for the defense of European countries.
Yeah, it may. I think it may portend a shift in European politics just because these people tend to be so unpopular anyway. I saw one poll where AfD has a super majority of support among the youth in Germany. So it may take a little while for it to actually take effect, but I wouldn't be shocked to find that, a lot of these people that do call the U.S. an adversary now get replaced.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. We'll bring you back on for today's warning items. For today's warning items, we'll just go ahead and kick it off with this 50-51 protest. There was a new tactic that was exhibited down in Tampa, Florida this weekend as part of these 50-51 protests. This is 50 states, 50 state capitals, one movement. There were road blocks. However, one of the things that they did is these protesters would go out when there's a red light. They would go out and block the street where there was a red light. So those cars couldn't move anyway. And then they cleared the intersection before that light turned green. So this allowed them to protest, but not actually impede traffic. And this is something that could be adopted at similar protests across the country. And I bring this up for a few reasons. Number one, because this new tactic, blocking traffic only during red lights, is a solution to complaints that disruptive protests bother locals. It impedes people from getting to work and driving around the city, but it doesn't actually solve their Trump problem. And that is an accurate and legitimate, valid critique. However, I think another reason is because this movement is just not in a position. They're not strong enough to be able to do this. One of the reasons why the Occupy Wall Street movement failed, because it headed into the winter and it was just too cold for people. But the other reason was because you go back and you look at polling, and a majority of Americans said they, or at least purportedly, agreed with the cause of Occupy Wall Street, but they didn't agree with the disruption to everyday life. You remember those occupations that were happening, and there was crime and drug use and all sorts of stuff. And the local people they did not want that happening in their city. We also saw this with Black Lives Matter, where we saw numerous videos of locals becoming enraged and irate at these BLM roadblock protests because they were just trying to get to work and they couldn't drive to work with these roadblock protests. So I'm looking at this tactic. It is more sustainable. It's going to make fewer enemies of the protest movement, this 50-51 protest movement. And so its use is, I think, very likely to spread to other 50-51 protest groups across the country. Let's bring Robert back on and jump into this Supreme Court potentially getting involved here in the special counsel firing. What's going on?
So the Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to basically lift a lower federal court's restraining order that's blocking Trump from firing U.S. Office of Special Counsel Chief Hampton Dellinger. There's also an interesting comment from Trump's FTC chair, Andrew Ferguson. He actually called the Supreme Court to overturn legal precedent shielding independent agency officials from being unilaterally fired by the White House as well. I think this is important because if we take a zoomed out 3,000-foot view of what the Trump administration has been doing for roughly the last month, is I think enacting a revolutionary change with the federal bureaucracy. And part of that is, and on the one hand, getting control over Treasury payments through the Bureau of Fiscal Services and USAID. But I think on the other hand, they're also trying to, like we said earlier, decapitate a lot of the federal bureaucracy that would otherwise hinder the Trump agenda. And a lot of that is in what it has become effectively an unofficial fourth branch of the government in a combination of the federal bureaucracy, these independent agencies, in concert with some of the lower federal courts. And I think the Trump administration trying to clear these out is also taking aim at a major source of political and legal power for the Democratic Party, because they've used some of these independent agencies like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the FTC, the SEC, to go after political opponents with, what are labeled as politically exposed persons with both lawfare and debanking during the Biden administration.
Mm-hmm. So this is a repeating theme here. where the Trump administration is asking for help basically from the Supreme Court. So not only in this, but also the Impoundment Act, they want a Supreme Court ruling on that. Let's just take this one step further. Let's say the Supreme Court does rule in favor of the Trump administration on both of these issues. That is definitely going to inflame the left. This is going to give a green light to the Trump administration to do a lot of the things that it wants to do. We were talking before the show about what is the left's course of action, and the left really is not a big monolith. But maybe we can talk about that on Friday's roundtable. What is actually the course of action? But what I want to talk about is what happens if the Supreme Court rules against the Trump administration, that the Trump administration cannot fire the special counsel, that they cannot overturn the Impoundment Act and basically handcuff Trump to these spending bills that have already been passed, for essentially forcing the Trump administration to spend that money anyway. What are Trump's options after that?
Well, I think that comes to like a crossing the Rubicon moment. Either the Trump administration complies with the Supreme Court decision that goes against them, or they defy the Supreme Court. I mean, it's not necessarily unprecedented. I mean, but we have to go back pretty far in time in American history to see a president openly defy the courts. But I think that's really, they come to a crossroads at that point, and that starts to potentially create a constitutional crisis, I think.
Well, I think we're probably headed there one way or the other, because so much of this is, I talked about a few weeks ago, intra-elite conflict. And this is something that I started tracking back in 2016, because I recognize Trump as a counter-elite, and people can agree or disagree with that, but he undoubtedly, he and Peter Thiel and the rest, and now you've got the kind of the tech right here as the counter-elite to oppose the establishment elite. And the big problem here is that both sides of the elite, they have diametrically opposing visions for this country. And that's one reason that it concerns me so much, is because this really is a zero-sum game. Either the Trump administration is able to deconstruct the administrative state and siphon or sap all the power away from the establishment elite that has been taking us down a globalist agenda and moving us more towards European-style socialism, or the counter-elite wins and locks the elite out of power. And that, historically, that's how you get civil wars, is when elites go to war with each other. So, Robert, thanks for staying on top of this. This is actually very concerning to me. And, this may be a case where people can't really see a civil war happening in the United States. And I'm not talking about states versus states, 1861. And I also don't think it's imminent. I think Democrats are going to try to get through the midterms and see if they can regain some power in the House and Senate. So I don't expect anything major prior to 2026. But I'll tell you, if the Democrats, if Republicans hold on in 26 to their congressional majorities, and another Republican wins in 28 to continue this second Trump agenda, maybe call it a third Trump term, if you will, I think we're going to have major problems in this country. Thanks for staying on top of this, Robert. Let's move on here. Speaking of the Trump resistance, one of the things we have seen from a lot of these progressive groups is they say this fight is legal and political. We're going to keep it in the courts. We're going to keep it inside Congress for now, at least. So what's the latest here on this expansion of lawfare?
Yeah, so Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, he signaled that, I think that they're going to expand their actions in the courts. And one of the things he said is that the courts are an important venue for, quote, holding Donald Trump accountable when he breaks the law. And he said that the Senate Democrats are going to issue demand letters, hold public hearings, and then pursue legal action where necessary. And in the House, Democrats have also formed a litigation working group that's going to be chaired by Rep. Jamie Raskin, who is the senior Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. And he said they're going to start out by writing amicus briefs for these ongoing lawsuits, but could also join lawsuits if House Democrats have what he called distinctive interests that are not already represented. I think this is happening because congressional Democrats are effectively locked out from interfering with the Trump administration's executive actions. Democrats only, I think, remaining political recourse in Congress is the Senate legislative filibuster. But a lot of What Trump has been doing has been through executive actions and executive orders, and then congressional Republicans have been looking at this budget reconciliation process to get a lot of their priorities through, and that does not require any Democrat help in the Senate to get passed. I think what's going on here, in a larger sense, is that the Trump administration, I think, is edging closer to defying these lower federal courts. And I think, to me, a sign of that is that this Rhode Island district judge had to come out, it was last Monday, and basically reiterate that he had ordered the Trump administration to unfreeze all that federal spending, and they had not done so. And, I think if Trump does openly defy the lower courts, or the Supreme Court sides with the Trump administration, or he defies the Supreme Court, I think this is going to remove what, a lot of the Trump resistance sees as the only effective legal avenue until the 2026 midterms. And I think, like you said, if they do lose in the 2026 midterms, that opens up some potentially dangerous extra legal courses of action they might start to look toward. One of the other avenues they are taking, I did see where some House Democrats, because they're on recess for the next week, the Democratic leadership is pushing them to support some of what they're calling 9 days of visibility protests in their districts. And this is basically going to target like Tesla dealerships and some local government offices, as far as I've seen.
Mm-hmm. And when is that set to start?
I think they want to do it They want to get it started this week, sometime this week while the House is in recess. But I haven't seen like a start date or any specific dates yet for what they're calling the 9 days of visibility.
Okay. Yeah, Greg, let's keep an eye out on that. And I'll also look for it in my channels. Just a brief question here. I've seen also a lot of people advance this argument, which I think is correct. Trump administration has to get Congress to enshrine some of these things into law. Otherwise, these executive orders are just going to be overturned if a Democrat wins in 2028. What's the actual prospect here?
Well, I think the larger problem for Trump is that Congress, Congress is effectively, I think, deadlocked outside of like stuff that has to pass, like the spending bills, and I think the upcoming debt ceiling fight. And to me, a sign of that is that some of the Trump resistance figures have basically told Trump, if you want to do this, pass a bill. And I think they're saying that because they know that it's unlikely. But it is true that, if Trump does want to submit some of these things, he does need to get it passed in legislation, because I think the courts have proven that after the first Trump administration, that basically most other presidents can pass executive orders and Trump can't. Like, basically Trump's orders can be reversed, but Trump can't really reverse other presidents' executive orders so easily. And I think this blitz at the beginning of this current term was actually, in Trump's favor of being able to overturn a lot of the Biden administration executive orders, because under his first term, he tried to overturn in one case DACA, that's the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and the Supreme Court basically said that he didn't do it the correct way, and that seems to be a pattern here, is that Trump can pass executive orders, and the next president can just reverse them without any real resistance.
Mm-hmm. Hey, one more question for you, Robert. Back during the first Trump administration, their attorneys were trying to push through I don't know if it's a rule change or what, but they wanted these federal court judges, if a federal judge issued a stay against some Trump executive order or some policy, it only pertained to that judge's jurisdiction. It did not automatically trigger a nationwide stay. Have you seen anything about the Trump administration trying to bring this back? Because this is one way where they could really limit. I mean, basically, you then force lawsuits in all the country's district courts, not just one.
I haven't seen anything specific on trying to bring that back, but I think that's where they're headed, and part of the Trump kind of ignoring or defying some of this court, like the Rhode Island District Court. I think when it comes to the Supreme Court, when they eventually get there, there are signs that could break in Trump's favor. We talked about Justice Thomas in a 2018 lawsuit, like it was Hawaii versus Trump or something like that, where he basically outlined, like, hey, this allowing a lower district court to put in a national injunction is kind of getting out of hand, and eventually we're going to come to that fight, and I think that might come during Trump's current term.
All right, thanks for that, Robert. Let's move on here to the auto tariffs coming on the 2nd of April. We've heard from a lot of these U.S.-based vehicle manufacturers about how catastrophic this could be for them. What's going on?
Yeah, President Donald Trump said over the weekend that he's going to unveil new tariffs on imported automobiles on the 2nd of April. And like we covered before, so U.S. automakers have warned that this is the impending blanket tariffs on Canada and Mexico that are supposed to start in a little bit less than a month would blow a hole in the auto industry. And it's because about 80% of the parts used in U.S.-made vehicles are imported from Mexico and Canada. But I think in this case, the Trump administration likely intends for these tariffs to kind of remove a foreign automaker advantage that Ford Motor CEO Jim Farley warned about when he said that the Canada and Mexico tariffs could blow a hole in the U.S. auto industry. And this is, I think, to kind of balance out that advantage that Jim Farley says foreign auto importers would have if these Canada and Mexico tariffs do go through.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then just kind of bottom line here, Trump wants these auto parts to be manufactured in the United States. That's the reason why there's tariffs, correct or no?
Yeah. I think that's been his stated goal of that, and the reciprocal tariffs that he's been talking about that we covered last week is to try to get as much manufacturing back in domestically as possible. And I think this is sort of to balance out potential advantages that foreign automakers would have if he did implement those tariffs to make those parts more expensive for U.S. automakers.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks for that. Let's bring Jared on. So, Jared, this is interesting. There was a key phrase that was removed from a State Department website. It may not be indicative of the new Trump policy. Maybe it is. But the Taiwanese think it is, and the Chinese think it is. So what's going on?
Yes. So Taiwanese officials publicly announced their thanks to the State Department for removing this clause that it will not support Taiwan independence from its U.S.-Taiwan relations page. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded by declaring this was against international law and basic norms of international relations, which is perhaps an overreaction to a web page change. Now, previously, the Biden admin removed this clause, but quickly returned it after the Chinese protested. The Trump admin, I don't think, is likely to add the clause back. And I think in combination with the tariffs, which the Chinese view as a Chinese containment measure, Chinese demographic challenges, American reindustrialization plans, and so many other things that we've covered here at Early Warning, I think China may feel pressured into making a move on Taiwan early while China still appears to have the upper hand. At least that is an increased risk. I don't think it is, necessarily a certainty or a likelihood, but certainly, but definitely an increased risk that we need to be tracking here in the next couple of years.
Mm. Could this be? And listen, I don't have an opinion on this one way or the other, but it just crossed my mind. Could this be a kind of a, no pun intended, a weather balloon against China to test their reaction, maybe even to push them into a premature action? Maybe when, what do you make of that? What if the Trump administration is actually trying to force China into this? Because if the Trump administration, let's just say they do, I don't know if they will or not, way outside my lane, but let's just say they do signal a shift that they are going to or will support Taiwanese independence. That's a red line for China. Could this be like a negotiating tactic from the Trump administration? Just basically saying, we could support Taiwanese independence, but we need you to negotiate on something else for us.
It could. So the Trump administration, as far as I can tell, what their threats have always been, we are going to make threats that we know we can back up. So if they're going to come to the Chinese and say, hey, we could support this, then they would have to be able to, realistically threaten, we will help Taiwan gain independence. And that would mean that they probably have internal views much closer to mine than the mainstream, where China is not prepared to take them in 2027. Now that could be used as a negotiating tactic to get China to back down on a lot of things like the Senkaku Islands, obviously Taiwan, and potentially the South China Sea. But it's a bold move. It is a very bold move because China could just go, okay, well, we don't have a choice. We have to do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, something we don't have to answer today, but thanks for the insight there, Jared. All right, let's speaking of the South China Sea here, looking at Scarborough Shoal, Chinese helicopters buzzed a Philippine aerial patrol. What's going on?
Yes. So that was this morning over there. A Chinese helicopter flew within 10 feet of a Philippine civilian government plane that was conducting a patrol over Scarborough Shoal. The Chinese are framing this actually as a successful warning off of the Philippines over the shoal. Now, back in late 23, here at Early Warning, we warned that the Philippines' use of aircraft for surveillance and resupplies could end up in an aerial collision due to Chinese aggression. Now, that would almost certainly result in deaths for one or both sides, especially because helicopters are notoriously unstable if you throw them off at all. And the Philippines are just running basically Cessnas. They're not particularly robust aircraft, and that greatly increases the likelihood that the Philippines would actually activate its mutual defense treaty with the United States of America, because we've moved past a sailor losing his thumb into people are dead now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I blame the FAA for this near miss. Jared, you've been talking about. I'm obviously joking about that, but
the Philippines did.
They blame the FAA.
They said that the Chinese are violating FAA laws. So that was part. I know they may have their own FAA. The Philippines structures a lot of stuff after the government, but that caught me off guard this morning. And their statement was, "Hey, the Chinese are violating FAA laws."
Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, listen, Jared, you've been saying for a while that these continued aggressive maneuvers is risking a conflict between the Philippines and China. I'm sure seems like they're continuing down that path here potentially. All right. I don't see any questions here in the chat, so I'm going to call it a day. All right. Jared, go ahead. Do you have anything else to add?
I was going to say we still do have the ones from the roundtable last week that we didn't get to.
Okay. Well, we will get to those. We'll get to those later this week. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. This is going to do it for today's Early Warning morning briefing. We'll be back in your inbox tomorrow morning and back on this briefing at 08 Central Time. If you'd like to join us over on the high side, get intraday updates, chat with our analysts, and see all the other information that we're putting out all throughout the day, including like an afternoon brief, do that. Go ahead and head over to earlywarningnetwork.com, sign up for a free 7-day trial, and join us on the high side. And with that, everyone, have a great rest of your day. We'll be back tomorrow, 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.